Richard Nixon was born in California when he first went to the Whittier College to learn about politics. He began his political career in 1946 as a congressman when he represented his California district at the House of Representatives. Nixon ran against John F. Kennedy for president in 1960, but lost because Kennedy was more appealing to voters on television. Nixon seemed to be very nervous in comparison. Nixon made his political comeback in 1968 as he led the Republican Party against Hubert Humphrey in the presidential elections.
As president, Nixon's philosophy was to decrease the amount of federal government. Nixon's goal was to get the U.S. troops out of Vietnam. Another concern of his was to keep the world clean. He passed the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and Mammal Marine Protection Act. In addition to these new laws, he created the Job Corps operation, which financed housing for low, middle-income families. Since it was a tough economy when Nixon was president, Nixon had to cut spending by using revenue sharing, which is when state and local government could spend their federal dollars but had to fit in certain limitations. Revenue sharing reduced state and local taxes and got rid of frivolous spendings.
Nixon hoped to gain credit for easing Cold War tensions and hoped to strengthen relations with Moscow and Beijing to pressure North Vietnam to end the war. Nixon wanted to have control over the foreign policy as he kept the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense out of the loop. Lyndon B. Johnson and Nixon are similar because they wanted control over foreign policy. Johnson kept Congress out of the loop when he was sending troops to Vietnam. Because of this, the War Powers Act was created. Once Nixon came to his presidency, like Johnson, he too wanted control over foreign policy. While Nixon was trying to create better relations with the Soviet Union and the Republic of China, he kept the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense out of the loop.
Nixon's legacy during his presidency starts with him fixing relations with the Soviet Union and the Republic of China. With these newfound relationships comes the Nuclear Arms Control Agreement with the Soviets. This agreement regulated how many nuclear weapons you could store, which helped end the Cold War and the withdrawal from Vietnam. Nixon was also the first and only president to resign from office. He resigned after winning his second term election. This was a result of the Watergate scandal. Watergate is the name of a hotel where the Democratic meetings were held before the second-term election. Nixon was responsible for planting recorders in the room where the meetings were held. This information was leaked, and Nixon finally had to hand over the tapes. Congress then threatened to impeach Nixon if he did not resign. So for that reason, and because of the embarrassment from the scandal, Nixon resigned and his Vice President Ford took office.
Not only in America, but all around the world, people will be watching the results of our election. I had no prior knowledge of the Watergate break-in. I neither took part in nor knew about any of the subsequent cover-up activities.
What happened here is an incumbent administration set out to manipulate the internal politics of the opposition. One senator has called it an attempt to rig an election. I don't know if you would go that far or not.
That was, and that is, the simple truth.
Gerald Ford, in 1948, got a seat in Congress and worked in Congress for 25 years before becoming Nixon's vice president. However, he was considered rather unimportant as vice president, but after the Watergate scandal, he became president in 1974 due to the Watergate scandal. He became president due to the 25th Amendment, which states, whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Ford was also preferred over Nixon due to his nice personality, his knowledge of budgets, and his willingness to compromise with people that opposed him, which helped push him to Republican leadership in the presidential election.
Being the first president unelected, Ford's approach was to use fiscal conservatism. This is when a political party agrees with their own and disagrees with everything the opposing party says. Ford vetoed 66 pieces of legislation because of the highly Democratic Congress. Ford, being a Republican, only agreed with the other Republicans and disagreed with all Democrats in Congress, causing much difficulty for laws to be passed. Each party had their own views on how to fix this shaky economy. Ford inherited a weak economy from President Nixon. Inflation and unemployment were highly rising, and the unemployment rate was at 9.2%. One law that was passed by Congress was the Privacy Act of 1974, which ensured the right of Americans to privacy of individuals. This requires that agencies give the people notice of their systems of records.
Ford continued to follow the foreign policies encouraged by Nixon. Ford supported Nixon's goals of détente with the Soviet Union, improved relations with China, and American support for government of South Vietnam. He furthered détente, which was the easing of hostility or strained relations between countries, by signing the Helsinki Accords.
During Ford's presidency, he attended the Helsinki Final Act held in Finland that addressed several global issues, including those involving communism. Ford helped the country move on from Watergate and attempted to regain the trust of the U.S. citizens after Nixon lost their trust. Ford also tried to help the economy, but his plan to cut taxes and limit government spending was unsuccessful. Ford is also responsible for the energy program, which sought to increase domestic energy production, promote the conservation of depleting energy supplies by using domestic energies such as fossil, nuclear, solar, and geothermal energy sources. Although these were all important events, Ford's most important legacy was how he pardoned Nixon from criminal charges for the Watergate scandal, which divided the country. Many did not support this pardon.
Therefore, I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, pursuant to the pardon power conferred upon me by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, have granted, and by these presents do grant, a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon for all offenses against the United States which he, Richard Nixon, has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from July 20, 1969 through August 9, 1974.